Every investigation begins with a question. Genesis has traditionally been read as the story of a single human family, but what if the earliest chapters preserve the memory of more than one lineage? We will examine the Hebrew consonants and ask whether they preserve the memory of two houses, one associated with El and Ella, the mother, and another associated with Yahweh. If that hypothesis is correct, then the women of Genesis are not merely wives and mothers. They become the guardians, bridges, and preservers of those lineages. Our investigation begins where the Hebrew Bible begins, with the consonants alone. Since the year 2000, inspired by Philo of Alexandria, we've been developing a method for examining the Hebrew consonantal text. Our goal has been to ask whether the consonants themselves preserve additional coherent readings that later vocalizations may have obscured. Every transformation, every proposed reading, and every observation will be documented so that anyone can follow the same steps and judge the evidence independently. Only after establishing the method do we begin asking what story those consonants may actually be telling. The earliest Hebrew manuscripts recorded only consonants. After removing only the silent aleph, we preserve every remaining consonant exactly as written. Only then do we explore whether alternative vowels and spacing reveal additional coherent readings. In the opening words of Genesis, we encounter our first possibility. The consonants traditionally read as Bereshit bara Elohim may also be divided differently. In our Enigma reading, they introduce what appears to be the first divine family, son of Ish, life, father, light, goddess, the mother. Before Yahweh enters the story, another act of creation takes place. The Elohim already exist as Ish and Isha, the male and female beings of the divine family, but Genesis 1:27 introduces two different words, Zakah and Nekeba. And who creates them? Not Yahweh, LHM creates them. In our Enigma reading, LHM preserves Elohim, goddess the mother. This distinction echoes the older Mesopotamian tradition. There, male and female gods already exist before the mother goddess fashions a new order of beings from clay for a particular purpose. Genesis may preserve the same sequence. Ish and Isha come first. Then LHM manufactures Zakah and Nekeba. They are the biological beings required in preparation for the new lineage that is about to begin. Our investigation now turns to one of the most familiar names in the Bible, Genesis 2:7, and again Genesis 2:20, introduce the consonants DM. Traditionally, these consonants are read as Adam, the man formed from the earth. But our Enigma method asks us to begin one step earlier. Before adding vowels or accepting inherited spacing, we examine the consonants themselves. Could DM preserve more than one coherent reading? Alongside the traditional reading, we will test another possibility, Ada M, Ada the mother. If this alternative remains consistent with the chapters that follow, then Edam may describe the Zakah prepared by LHM, while Ada M identifies Ada the mother, the Nekeba. Genesis 2:23 marks the first time the woman is called Aisha. The traditional translation reads, Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called Isha because she was taken out of Ish." Notice something unusual. The text does not say she was taken out of Adam. It says she was taken out of Ish. Now let's examine the consonants behind the phrase translated bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Segmented another way, the same consonants become Isha, M, Ish, M, Yor, Ab, Isha, Or, M, Ab, Isha, Or. Read word for word, we discover that woman, mother, mother of man, mother of Eve, father of woman of light, mother, father of woman of light. This is an alternative segmentation of the same consonantal sequence. Notice the recurring pattern: woman, mother, man, Eve, father, woman of light. These are the same themes we have already encountered in the opening chapters of Genesis. Genesis 2:23 has traditionally been translated, "This one was taken out of Ish." For centuries, this verse has been understood to mean that woman was derived from man. But once again, that understanding depends upon later vocalization and word divisions. Our investigation begins with the consonants alone. Using the same consonants, an alternative segmentation becomes possible. The recovered words read, "Mother Isha equal this." Read together, the sentence becomes, "Mother Aisha is equal to Ish." The difference is profound. The traditional reading describes woman as taken from Ish. The alternative reading describes Mother Aisha as equal to Ish. If this reconstruction preserves an earlier layer of the text, the opening chapters of Genesis begin with partnership rather than hierarchy. The mother is not presented as secondary to Ish. She stands beside him as an equal. This principle will guide the remainder of our investigation into the hidden lineage preserved within Genesis. Genesis 4 begins with one of the Bible's most enigmatic birth announcements. Eve declares, "I have acquired an Ish, Yahweh." The Hebrew text does not simply say, "with Yahweh" or "for Yahweh." That unusual wording invites closer examination. If we read the passage alongside the earlier creation account, another possibility emerges. The text distinguishes between Ish and Zakar, and between Isha and Nekeba. Could those distinctions carry more significance than is usually recognized? Yahweh, identified as an Ish, knows Ada, the Nekeba who gives birth to Adam, identified as a Zakar. Adam knows Eve, the Isha. Their son Cain is then described as an Ish, sharing the designation of his mother rather than that of Adam. If this reading is correct, the determining line is maternal rather than paternal. The identity of Ish or Isha and of Zakar or Nekeba is carried through the mother. This hypothesis also suggests that the seed of El and Elah Haim is preserved through Eve, while Adam remains identified as a Zakar, not an Ish. We now come to the birth of Abel. Traditionally, Genesis 4:2 is translated, "And she added to bear his brother Abel." But once again, our investigation returns to the consonants themselves. Rather than accepting the traditional spacing, we ask whether another coherent sequence has been preserved within the same letters. As the consonants unfold, a remarkable pattern begins to emerge. We encounter life, woman, wondrous, goddess, decree, life, to become, the life of Father El. Rather than describing only the birth of Abel, the consonantal sequence can also be understood as preserving the memory of the woman, the wondrous goddess, who was decreed to be the life that will become the lineage of Father El. This is the first place where our enigma investigation begins to resemble a much older tradition. The Sumerian accounts describe a divine order existing before the preparation of a new human order through the mother. Here, our enigma investigation reveals a sequence that closely parallels that pattern. First the divine order, then the preparation of a new human order through the mother. If this reading continues to remain consistent with the chapters that follow, then Abel may represent far more than a shepherd. The name Ab-El may preserve the memory of the child of Father El, and that possibility becomes the next question our investigation will test. The traditional translation of Genesis 4:8 reads, "Cain rose against Abel his brother and killed him." This translation depends upon the later Masoretic vocalization and word divisions, added many centuries after the Hebrew text had been compiled. Our investigation begins one step earlier. We return to the consonants alone. Instead of beginning with the traditional divisions, we ask a simple question. Can these same consonants be segmented differently while producing a coherent message? The first recovered sequence reads, "And Mother Light produced El's Abel living lineage." Notice that the familiar name Abel can also be viewed as Abel, Ab, father, and El, El. The next sequence continues, "Mother, father, Ish, and Aisha." Rather than introducing two brothers, the recovered words continue describing the lineage associated with Father El. The next sequence introduces a second maternal line. Ada and the Yahweh brought Cain into existence. Within this reconstruction, Ada becomes the mother of the Cain lineage. Finally, the closing sequence reads, "Destroyed El's Abel living lineage." Read as a whole, the same consonants no longer describe only the death of one individual, they preserve a struggle between two competing lineages. Yahweh's lineage seeks to destroy the Elohim lineage. If this reconstruction is correct, the genealogy that follows is no interruption of the story. It is the author's testimony that the Elohim lineage survived. We now come to the birth of Seth. Traditionally, Genesis 4:25 is translated, "And she bore a son and called his name Seth, because God has appointed for me another seed." But once again, our investigation returns to the consonants themselves. Rather than accepting the traditional spacing, we ask whether another coherent sequence has been preserved within the same letters. As the consonants unfold, a remarkable pattern begins to emerge. We encounter life, El return, father within, woman mother, woman life on earth, placed within, seed of Ella the mother. Rather than reading only the birth of another child, the consonants preserve the continuation of the maternal line that has guided our investigation from the beginning. Seth is not merely a replacement for Abel. It is the preservation of the living seed after the destruction of Father El's first child. The recurring themes of life, woman, earth mother, and goddess suggest that Genesis may be directing our attention once again to the lineage of Father El and Ella the mother. We have now completed our first investigation into the opening chapters of Genesis. We now return to the broader story and ask where these patterns lead. As the genealogies unfold, an unexpected pattern emerges. Cain and Seth are presented as separate sons of Adam and Eve, yet their descendants repeatedly bear the same or strikingly similar names: Enoch, Irad and Jared, Mehujael and Mahalalel, Methushael and Methuselah, and finally, Lamech. Such close parallels naturally raise questions. Are these simply recurring family names? Do they preserve two versions of the same ancestral tradition? Or do they point to a literary relationship that has not been fully recognized? Within the interpretive approach explored in this study, another possibility also deserves consideration. The text never explicitly states that Seth was male. It speaks of God appointing another seed after the death of Abel. If the narrative preserves more than one layer of meaning, might Seth originally have represented the first mother, the shepherd through whom the line continued after Abel's death? Whether one accepts that proposal or not, the repeated names invite a question that the text itself encourages us to ask. Why do two supposedly separate family lines preserve virtually the same ancestral memory? As we continue reading Genesis, another curious pattern emerges. Adam is named, Eve is named, Cain is named, Abel is named, Seth is named. Yet when the descendants of Cain begin, the narrative simply tells us Cain knew his wife. Her name is never given. For centuries, readers have asked the obvious question: who was Cain's wife? But perhaps another question is just as important. Why does the text omit her name? In a book that carefully records the names of its principal characters, the silence is striking. If the Hebrew text preserves more than one literary layer, the missing name may not have been forgotten at all. It may have been intentionally concealed within the consonantal text itself, waiting to be recovered through the same kind of enigmatic reading that ancient interpreters associated with the scriptures. The next passage explores one possible answer to that question. For 6 generations, Genesis records fathers and sons. Then, without warning, the pattern changes. 2 women suddenly enter the narrative, Ada and Zillah. They are the first women named after Eve, and their children are remembered as the founders of herding, music, and metalworking, the beginnings of civilization itself. The genealogy pauses to tell us something unexpected. Lamech took 2 wives. Why does Genesis interrupt a carefully ordered genealogy to preserve that detail? Within the interpretive approach explored in this presentation, the names themselves invite closer examination. The consonants of Ada, D, rendered UD, carry the meaning testimony or witness. Ada also echoes the nekaba concealed within LHM, where the feminine figure was likewise identified as Ada. The consonants of Zillah, SLH, may be rendered Isha El Ella, woman of El Ella. At the very point where the genealogy begins to describe the origins of human culture, Genesis introduces two women by name and draws the reader's attention to them. The question is no longer simply who they were, the question is why the author wanted us to remember them. Cain was remembered as a tiller of the ground. The keeper of animals, Abel, was replaced by Seth, but 6 generations later, none of Lamech's sons are farmers. Why does the occupation that defined Cain disappear from his own descendants? Now look at the names. Jabal, Jubal, Tubal, Cain. Jabal carries the idea of bringing forth. Jubal can mean he or it will be led. Tubal Cain suggests the lineage of Father El and Cain are brought into union. All 3 names echo Father El. Could Jabal preserve the lineage of Father El through the shepherd? Could Jubal carry Father El's lineage forward through music? Could Tubal Cain unite the names of Father El and Cain in a single descendant whose craft serves both crops and herds? If so, the genealogy is doing far more than preserving a family tree. It may be preserving the memory of 2 divided families becoming one again. Lamech and Zillah's only daughter is named Naamah. Consonants Nmh can be read, I am mother. The genealogy of Cain concludes with an unexpected detail. After generations in which daughters remain unnamed, Genesis pauses to preserve the name of one woman, Naamah. Her name is traditionally understood to mean pleasantness, delight, or beauty. Why was her name remembered when so many others were left unnamed? Centuries later, the Hebrew Bible introduces another woman bearing the same uncommon name. She is Naamah the Ammonite, the mother of Rehoboam, heir to the throne of David. The recurrence of so distinctive a name naturally invites a question. Is Naamah simply another individual who happened to share the same name? Or has Genesis preserved a name that carries an older tradition forward through Israel's history? Within the interpretive approach explored in this presentation, the women of Genesis seldom disappear. Instead, they often reappear under familiar names, quietly guiding the story from one generation to the next. If that pattern is intentional, then Naamah may represent more than the final name in Cain's genealogy. She may become the bridge to the generations that follow. As the genealogy of Cain draws to a close, a different picture begins to emerge. The descendants of Cain are remembered not for violence alone, but for the foundations of civilization. Jabal tends the flocks. Jubal fills the world with music. Tubal Cain shapes metal with fire, and Naamah quietly stands among them. These are not merely names in a genealogy. They represent the gifts that transformed human society. Yet, notice what the text does not preserve. The farmer who first defined Cain's line has disappeared. In his place stand the shepherd, the musician, the craftsman, and the daughter. Within the interpretive approach explored in this presentation, that change may not be accidental. The genealogy appears to move steadily away from division and toward restoration. The descendants of Cain no longer stand apart from the memory of Abel. Instead, shepherds and craftsmen, women and men, families and traditions begin to stand together. The image before us captures that possibility. At the center stands the great tree, holding within itself both darkness and light. Its roots reach into a world marked by conflict. Its branches open toward a restored creation filled with life. Watching over both is the quiet presence of the mother, whose image seems woven into the tree itself. Whether understood as history, literary symbolism, or theological memory, Genesis closes Cain's genealogy not with despair, but with hope. The story that began with 2 brothers divided now hints at the possibility that what was once broken may one day become whole again. Our journey began with a single question. Could the earliest chapters of Genesis preserve more than one layer of meaning? As we followed the genealogies, unexpected patterns began to emerge. Names repeated across generations, women appeared at pivotal moments in the narrative, occupations changed, family lines that seemed divided hinted at reconciliation, and beneath the familiar story, the consonantal text repeatedly invited us to look again. Whether these observations ultimately reflect literary artistry, historical memory, or intentional enigma remains for each reader to consider. But one conclusion is already clear: Genesis is far richer than we often imagine. Its earliest chapters continue to reward those willing to ask new questions of ancient words. In Part 3, our investigation continues. The women who quietly entered the story will begin to shape its future. The names we have traced through Cain's genealogy will reappear in unexpected places. And the search for the hidden history preserved within the Hebrew consonants will lead us still deeper into the remarkable world of Genesis.